Now, our first speaker is making a return visit here to Southern California. 4 decades ago, he arrived and spent time working in the aerospace industry. He heard about the John Birch Society during the election year in 1964, and he decided to investigate, had his eyes opened, and joined the society. He's a member, then a chapter leader, section leader, then a coordinator. In 1973, he was asked to assume office responsibilities at the West Coast Regional Office, a post he held for 16 years. For the past decade, he's been a national director of our TRIM effort, and he was one of the first staff members to arrive at our new Appleton headquarters in 1989. He's known officially as Manager of Special Projects, a title he says could accurately be bestowed on the guy with the shovel who follows the elephants in the parade or something. Members read his comments in the trim section of the bulletin each month. In June, he'll celebrate his 26th year as a member of the Society staff, a veteran, a wonderful asset to our whole organization. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jim Toft. Jim?
Thank you. It's great to be back. I left my shovel in Appleton. It would not fit in the overhead compartment. When I was a kid growing up in rural upstate Michigan, and that was several years ago, I used to hear this little ditty on our old battery-powered Zenith. I'm a-packing my bags, I'm a-leaving today, gonna make the San Fernando Valley my home. I start my talks with a song because my singing makes anything that follows sound pretty good. My birch roots run deep here in California. When the media back in the 60s was suggesting that birchers were a whole lot like Klansmen and Nazis, I could not understand why my candidate, Barry Goldwater, didn't just flat out denounce the JBS. But being the natural-born troublemaker that I am, I wanted to see firsthand what this birch outfit was all about. So I started asking around, how can I get in touch with the John Birch Society? I finally found a guy who told me, go down to the drugstore on South Main and ask for Paul. And that's just about the way he said it. Armed with this secret instruction, I headed down to South Main. When I told the drugstore clerk I was there to see Paul, she motioned me toward the back. But the only one in the back was a pharmacist named Paul. He was a part-time coordinator for the John Birch Society, and within weeks, I was a zealous right-wing extremist in a JBS chapter in Fountain Valley. Thanks to our positive track record in the years since, the vicious insider smears of the mid-60s have pretty much faded away. But some other things haven't improved. In March of 1977, in the JBS Bulletin, Robert Welch was lamenting about how the office of the presidency was being degraded by Jimmy Carter. It seems that Mr. Carter, as part of his carefully crafted down-home good old boy image, had allowed his undershirt to show through his open, tieless collar. Today, 21 years later, we have a president who can't keep his pants on. But I will leave that subject, the president not keeping your pants on, to our featured speaker, who from the lofty perch high atop the White House enemies list is much better qualified. I might mention in passing, however, that being the National Director of TRIM has its perks too. I'm on the enemies list of about 400 congressional offices. I know a bircher who has a part-time job evenings as a custodian in a large office building. Now, right away, we know that he must be doing it for fun, because all birchers are rich. And he does have fun because of the occupants of the largest office suite on the floor to which he is assigned. This suite has no listing on the registry in the building's lobby. There is no name on the door. There is no listing in the local phone book. The shutters on the front door window are tightly drawn. Entry is only by security-coded keypad or by a closely monitored intercom identification. Is this a bookie joint? A speakeasy left over from Prohibition days? Is it part of the witness protection program? Could it be a remnant of the World War II Japanese Imperial Army awaiting reinforcements? No, it's none of these. It's the area office of a federal regulatory agency. Because this rich bircher, for some reason, needs this part-time job, I'll not disclose the agency or its location. To this secretive hideaway nightly comes the birch custodian, punching in his secret access code. Alone, he then proceeds to dig through the trash containers of all of the regulatory staff. He is required to dig through the trash by sections 1008 and 6004 of the Solid Waste Disposal Act as amended by the Resource Conservation Recovery Act of 1976 as amended. That's number 42 U.S. Code 6907. You may wish to take notes for our upcoming quiz. That's number 42 U.S. Code 6907 and 6964, which is authority for Environmental Protection Agency Federal Regulation Title 40, Chapter 1, Section 246.200-5. I knew you would have caught me on that one. which requires separation from trash of all recyclables. This longtime bircher has an inside view of the workings of a federal agency. Early last September, a few weeks before the end of the fiscal year, a mountain of new top-of-the-line laptop computers arrived. It appeared to him to be part of that federal phenomenon known as, be sure to spend all of your budget so we can ask for more next year. The computers then sat around in the factory cartons for months. While making the rounds in this suite of offices, he sometimes finds in the trash bundles of new pages of regulations still in their clear plastic shrink wrap that never made it into the ring binders before they were superseded by still newer regulations. Ladies and gentlemen, if a regulatory agency cannot even keep up with the filing of new regulations, what chance do the American people have of keeping up with their compliance? Thank you. President Clinton has assured us that the era of big government is over. And his shadow, Al Gore, has been hard at work for the last 5 years reinventing government. But somehow, in spite of Bill and Al, The Federal Register last year added 68,529 new pages. The Federal Register, as you probably know, is where new regulations, executive orders, and other government edicts are formally published, where they can take on the force of law. Just how much is 68,529 pages? It's a stack 9 feet and 3 inches high. Here in the shadow of Hollywood with its dramatic special effects, I originally planned a Rube Goldberg helium balloon-powered contraption to carry pages skyward, but the distinct possibility of debris raining down on the noggins of my head table colleagues caused me to go back to the drawing board on that one. Now, Mr. Businessman and Ms. Property Owner, you'd better have read this 9-foot 3-inch stack, because you can be held accountable for failing to comply with any regulation hidden in its pages. How big is the federal government? If you had won last week's California lottery and collected a lump sum of $100 million, you would be able to finance today's federal government for 31 minutes. Then you would owe the federal government about $39 million in taxes, which they could then use to operate for another 12 minutes. Bill Gates, the top guy at Microsoft, is the richest man in America. His fortune is estimated at around $35 billion. That's 35,000 million. If Mr. Gates pooled his assets, he could then fuel the federal bureaucracy for about a week, and then he'd be as broke as the rest of us. The era of big government is not yet over. One last observation from our Birch custodian. He was reminded by the desktop photos of children and family, by notes about soccer practice and Aunt Judy's birthday, that the regulatory agency employees, by and large, are not that much different from employees anywhere. They've taken advantage of a job that pays well, that is not likely to be downsized, and has great benefits, including retirement. But this unconstitutional, tax-draining, freedom-threatening agency exists because the American people stood by and allowed their representatives to create it. Totalitarian regimes often come to power through violence and terror, but once they have consolidated control, it is not necessary to have troops with machine guns on every street corner. The state bureaucracy will then control every facet of the lives of the populace, their health care, their food supply, their job, their children. If that bureaucracy is already in place, not a shot need be fired. In the Blue Book, Mr. Welch explained that we would be far better off to have a small government made up entirely of thieves than a large government run by dedicated public servants, because the first group would only steal from the American economic and political system, while the latter would be bound in time to destroy it. When Birchers in a southern state got together with their congressman some months back, he could not grasp their concern with his dismal trim record. The reason became clear with his reaction to a question from a Bircher. The question, is there any provision in the Constitution for any type of subsidy or welfare? The congressman interrupted, exclaiming, "Oh, but that's not the constitutional question. The constitutional question is it prohibited?" This man, who our members believe to be sincere, and who considers himself a staunch conservative, is 180 degrees out of phase with our founding fathers. He believes that if the Constitution doesn't specifically say you can't, then you can. So part of the reason that most House members do not uphold their oath to support and defend the Constitution
is that they have so little understanding of that great document. A brand new reprint is being announced next month, the May JBS Bulletin. It is reprinted from the current issue of the New American, an article by Gary Benoit called Congress and the Constitution. Gary does a terrific job of documenting, in their own words, the founders' intent to limit Congress to specific enumerated powers. Send a copy to your congressman, ask him to read it, and then to respond. But the major reason that members of Congress ignore their oath is that there is no informed electorate back home to challenge and rein in their usurpation of unconstitutional powers. Being bound by the change of the Constitution would severely cramp the freewheeling style of most Washington politicians. But they must be bound if our republic is to survive. The primary focus of our TRIM program is to create an informed electorate, one that knows the proper limited role of government. Such an electorate will then be able to hold their representative accountable and replace him if necessary. A congressman's oath will then no longer be a meaningless ritual performed at the opening of each new Congress. It will become a solemn contract with his constituents, and it will ultimately result in the dismantling of the welfare state in America. Our local police are the thin blue line that protect us from criminals in our community. Our congressmen must become the thin red, white, and blue line that restores constitutional rule and in so doing protects us from any foreign entanglements that threaten our sovereignty. In December, the John Birch Society will be 40 years old. Can you believe it? For decades. In that time, we have fought many battles, won some, lost some, but by always focusing on education, we gained ground even when not totally successful. We did not bring about the impeachment of Earl Warren, but we did wake up millions of Americans to the destructive effects of his activist court. It is a great tribute to the genius of Robert Welch that his organization and his educational strategy are now about to surge into the 21st century. At the founding meeting, Mr. Welch quoted Kipling, "All we know of freedom, all we need to know, this our fathers won for us long and long ago." One key to our perseverance these many years is our great sense of obligation to those patriots who sacrificed so much to build and protect our heritage. We owe it to the Founding Fathers. We owe it to John Birch, to Mr. Welch, to Larry McDonald, and we owe it to those valiant Birchers, the quiet heroes and heroines who have gone before us, carrying the torch of freedom to their last breath. In the late 1960s, I was a section leader in West Orange County. One major project at that time was gathering signatures on a petition to Congress to stop the traitorous aid and trade with the communist bloc that was in turn financing the killing of our young men in Vietnam. We had tables in shopping centers and were even taking the petition door to door. In fact, the most signatures were being gathered door to door by an elderly member who was dying from cancer. Although sadly, I cannot recall his name, I shall never forget him. He struggled to walk, doing so only with the aid of a cane, as waves of pain swept over him.
He, of anyone in our chapters, should have been excused from this project, and we pleaded with him to conserve his dwindling strength. But he continued. He was an immigrant from Europe where he had endured the loss of his freedoms. he felt a deep obligation to his new country. And like the best of Birchers, he read voraciously. And it was when I delivered a new supply of Birch books to his home that I learned of his death. And I picked up his last stack of signed petitions. I am privy to a similar story now unfolding here in California, the details of which I cannot yet share. Yes, the ranks of the John Birch Society have always been filled with quiet heroes and heroines, people who, by their example, promoted Americanism with a dedication and a dignity that inspired all around them. Please allow me to mention several Birchers that I had the privilege of knowing here in Southern California, who remain, even after their passing, a continuing inspiration for commitment to our cause, and I certainly would add the name of Herb Schroeder. These are some others that come to mind. Herb Baudistel, Vona Korn from Orange County, dear lady, ran our bookstore down there. From the San Diego area, Frosty Rogers. From out in the I don't know if it's the high desert, I'm not a desert expert, but out in the Palm Springs area, Dorothy Walden. This list is much longer, but if you look around you, my friends, there is no shortage in this room tonight of Americanists with whom you can be proud to stand shoulder to shoulder in what Mr. Welsh calls our epic undertaking. There are some members who are not here tonight to share in our big annual social fling, and a number of them are friends of mine. Now that may well explain the absence of some. Those who have heard me speak for free and were not about to pay $40 to endure such cruel punishment. But some who are not here tonight are not here because they have been caught up in a local turmoil that has deflected their focus away from Mr. Welsh's great crusade. You probably know some of them. When you next see them, please tell them that Jim said it's time to come back home. The John Birch Society needs their experienced hands at the oars, and they need the John Birch Society. Should we fail in the crucial years that lie just ahead to save our freedoms, there will be ample time in the gulag to debate the merits of policy and personnel. My friends, there is little doubt in my mind that you now have the hardest working, the most dedicated, and yes, the most demanding executive leadership of the John Birch Society since Robert Welsh was in his prime. Now that's not including me, the manager of special services. I'd like to invite you all to come back and visit us in Appleton. If you arrive in January or February, we'll provide the very latest in frostbite treatment. And we might throw in a mug of hot chocolate. It has been a special joy for me to be back with you tonight, and until we meet again, keep birching.